Aloha, welcome back to the Anxiety Coaches Podcast. I'm your host and coach, Gina Ryan, and I'm so happy to be with you again today as we consider the many ways to bring your mind and body back to its natural peace and calm. Welcome back to the Anxiety Coaches Podcast. If you're tuning in today, you're in for the continuation of my fascinating conversation with Dr. Drew Ramsey. If you missed the earlier episode with Dr. Drew, I highly recommend listening to it before diving into this episode because it's packed with incredible insights.
There's a way that self-awareness is something that is always in need of some attention, I find, because we're dealing with different things in different phases of our lives. I go through in the book some of the explicit ways that I've grown my self-awareness, that I see patients growing self-awareness. And then in all of the book, the tenets really backed up by research. Like when you think about journaling, like I've gotten lots of journaling recommendations. I hope where Healing the Modern Brain kind of separates out is I don't know that you've gotten a journaling recommendation that's attached to the neurobiology based on research of what happens when we engage in self-reflective processes. And so when we engage in self-reflective processes like journaling, right? You're journaling about yourself, people in your life. Over time, research has shown that we increase the activity in our prefrontal cortex. It's this new modern part of our brain that's involved in executive functioning and decision making, basically, like our ability to do stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's really exciting for me to think, okay, in the midst of like maybe struggling with some brain fog and doom scrolling, I'm going to spend just maybe 10 or 15 minutes in the morning with a pen and a paper and try and get good at sharing some thoughts. I have some prompts in the book. Lots of people have wonderful journaling prompts.
Yeah.
I'm a big free flow journaler. I'm not a big prompter, but I certainly
me too.
I try and my sense is like, I just try and write down the struggle. What's the pain of the day? What do I really need to like sort out? What am I scared of? But like I said, I have prompts in the book, and I've found it to be really clarifying. Like if I don't get to journal every couple of days, ideally even daily, like I really miss it. I feel like something's missing in the pacing of my life. So again, the book's full of techniques like this because maybe journaling's not your thing. My hope is to put a number of ideas out there for you, backed up by that science of, hey, whatever way you want to engage in self-awareness, let's all agree it is very important for all of us when it comes to managing our mental health and kind of up-leveling our mental fitness. Otherwise, you don't know where. In the book, I share the story of Charlotte, who's a woman I worked with who, like a lot of us, just started drinking too much during the pandemic. And a number of people I've gotten to work with who stopped alcohol in the last 5 years. It's really been an interesting trend to see. It inspired me so much. I stopped drinking as well. But for Charlotte, really, it wasn't that she had a huge background with substance use disorders where she had alcoholism in her family. She just kind of like, one thing led to another, and there she was, kind of putting down a bottle a day during the pandemic. So self-awareness, where she's one of these people you work with where you just kind of ask them to keep track, and by having some accountability with you once a week, maybe twice a week, and some tough weeks, like it kind of helps clean up the behavior. And that's what happened with her. So again, just this notion of self-awareness, for a lot of people, certainly it takes more than just that to stop something like alcohol or to tackle a mental health issue. But, self-awareness is really essential for this process and essential for you in your mental health journey.
Absolutely. And I love that that's the starting point. It's a beautiful place in anxiety, we talk about just breaking the cycle, and there's different places you can break the cycle. And same with your mental wellness, or your fitness. Where can you enter the process? Yeah.
So I hope to set
place.
it up that way, right?
Yeah.
Like self-awareness is a place, but I think with each of them, some of the tenets I think are, people know sleep hygiene and movement and nutrition are important for their mental health and their brain health over time. And I hope with each of the tenets, I give some good entry points. If you're struggling with nutrition, I hope you're not struggling with the idea of lentils, because they're inexpensive, delicious, and they're packed with folate, fiber, and protein, right?
Yeah.
3 things that most people aren't getting enough of.
Yeah.
And so I think there are some real actionable items in each of the tenets that, are low-hanging fruit, by design. I mean, I'm a clinician. Like if it doesn't work on a Wednesday night in Wyoming, like I don't really think it's that good of a mental health intervention. I just don't
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I mean, one, that's where I am, but
Yep.
I think, growing up in the Midwest and then practicing in New York where, there's a real kind of necessity of efficiency and
Mm.
pace
Yep.
and efficacy, like doing a good job quick. I don't know, the mix of those things is, I hope, led to me being a very practical clinician of
Mm.
appreciating, especially I think with the food books, appreciating, hey, where I'm from, my people, like our top grocery store is Walmart.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
That's normal.
and that's how it is for most of the country. And so anytime I've written a recipe or when I'm thinking about these things, I'm thinking about folks who are where maybe I'm from in Indiana. I'm thinking about the people here in my community in Wyoming
Hmm.
and in this state. And of course, I'm also thinking about where I did a lot of my practice in more urban areas.
Mm.
The book certainly gets into that and kind of shares as some of my path of, being in all these different places and seeing how it's affecting my mental health, seeing what challenges come up, getting into the research of that. I mean, part of living in New York was so great and awesome, and I learned so much and so
Hmm.
wonderful, especially to be in that kind of, it was a very special like wellness scene in New York City. Let's say
Sure.
around 2010, there's just whether it's the Mind Gut Body Green team that just was,
Hmm.
I don't know, it's just like a couple of them, or some of the luminaries in wellness were just getting started. It was just a very special time to be there. So I have great affection for that. I also noticed, boy, like my sleep hygiene took a hit. I started drinking a lot more. I started eating out a lot.
Yeah.
I was also exercising, being healthy in lots of ways. But there was a kind of remember the first 6 months I'd moved to New York, my eyes were always like just so much particulate matter, and it was just my eyes were always kind of like watering or tearing
Mm.
up. Or it was just
Yeah.
really kind of an intense noise pollution experience for me, as a lot of people. And then I adjusted like we do to things, but getting into some of the details and some of the science of what's actually going on in our brains.
Yeah.
We live in urban environments and in noise environments now where, the effect on our mental health and our cognition, the increase in our dementia risk is really clear in the literature. Same thing
Mm.
with the artificial light situation where we're just not getting that normal chronological kind of time light-based rhythm that our
Mm.
brain needs to clean out all the waste, to consolidate our memories and process our emotions. And so,
Mm.
there again, a lot of things that we can do, and a lot of lessons I've learned, my experience as a person and as a psychiatrist practicing in these different settings.
Yeah. And just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do it. I mean, I've worked with a lot of people, obviously coming to chat about anxiety, that had tried to move. That was their childhood dream. They were going to do XYZ and they were going to go to New York City. And I'm originally from central New York, so I know the downstate, I know about it. I would never live there, but, and then they find out, oh, the environment was such a huge shift for them that they were very disappointed in themselves when they don't quite make it, and they
Mm.
decide to go live in a different environment because they felt better. Now, there's the self awareness to know enough to go if it isn't your place, because it
Yeah, I
isn't
think
for everybody, right?
it isn't for everybody. And I also think that there are a lot of different factors that affect whether urban living is healthy for you or not.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people move apartments and it radically changed their mental health,
Yeah.
going from, let's say, a north facing apartment to something where you get a sunbeam.
Mm.
Sounds kind of silly until you are living in that space, and it makes a big difference. So there are all kinds of things that can affect someone's like urban living experience, as you
Yeah.
note. But it's a major test, and I think it taught me a lot about mental fitness because I'd meet a lot
Mm.
of patients where they moved to New York and they're smart, they're working a really high pressure job, they're going
Mm.
out, they're socializing, and their mental health just tanks.
Yeah.
And so understanding, well, what's going on? Well, how you connect up, like the tenet of connection, I think came out of my
Mm.
experience meeting a lot of people who were in the midst of mental health things. And one of the root causes of it was they were very isolated.
Yeah.
And, if you have a genetic propensity to a major mental health disorder, let's say like, our top cause of disability, depression, if you have a genetic propensity for depression, even if you're very well treated, if you end up in an isolated situation where you're really not getting any, kind of recreation, good times, connection, self-care, you're struggling, you're kind of insecure in a new space, you're more vigilant, right? This is just a kind of setup to activate that depression.
Yeah.
And so then you see when, you're a clinician, you often meet people in that state and you see them kind of step by step get out of it. You pay very close attention, like, wow, like what changed? Like, what
Yeah.
did you do? And so the tenets really stem from those moments for me clinically where it's like, wow, you really shifted what you eat. And wow, like you have a lot more energy. You're feeling better. You're sleeping better. Huh. Like that was a good change. Or as I mentioned earlier, when people connect and it doesn't have to
Yeah.
be romantic love. I really have enjoyed seeing, things like good friendships. I've heard about some birthday dinners recently where a couple of old friends like, get together and sit for hours over a pot of tea at the end. It's just
Yeah. Yeah.
so lovely to hear about. I think it's probably so inspiring for me. And so seeing again, what gets people better, I thinking that, hey, more of this in our life and encouraging everyone with these stories, but also with the research. I don't want everyone to
Yeah.
think these are just like stories of, I don't know, my journey and patient's journeys. I also like to get into stuff like, hey, you eat more seafood and omega-3 fats, you have more brain cells as you age. That's not wellness hyperbole. That's just scientific fact,
Right.
shown over and over again in the research. If you work on having more friendships and connection as you age, it's the equivalent of, in some ways, not smoking. Right. If you just kind of let modern life deteriorate your friendships and relationships, as so many of us can do, it's kind of like picking up a smoking habit. Like it's that
Wow.
bad for your health.
Yeah.
So, taking active steps to build community, to build connection. Again, I try to talk about the science through these, Gina, like new lenses is what I call them.
Mm.
We think when I trained, for example, we didn't think about neuroplasticity, this idea that your brain grows in adult life, your brain keeps repairing
Right.
itself, right? If Gina and I wanted to learn Japanese starting today, lo and behold, 9 months from now, you'd visit us in Tokyo where we'd be finishing up our intensive, and we wouldn't be perfect, but we'd speak some Japanese. It's like a wild thing
Yeah.
about the human brain. And so
Yeah.
that ability to learn a language or to heal a trauma, that's all neuroplasticity, right? Our ability of our brain cells to kind of do new and different things, and then
Yeah.
also to, kind of keep replenishing and giving us new brain cells. That's new. We didn't used to think about that. And so
Right.
now I talk about it in my last several books, right? Talking about this idea of our brain could be in grow and repair mode or grow mode. What can we do to put it in that mode more?
Right.
And so
Right.
that's
So
really
what do we do? Tell us. Give us a little taste here, especially if you could focus on the anxious brain.
for sure.
I know there's all kinds of different ways of looking at our brain.
Oh, this is fun.
And
Why don't we walk through the tenets? Sorry to interrupt you. Why don't we
yeah.
walk through the tenets and
Yeah.
just think about them? Kind
Yes.
of really aligned with anxiety. Everybody
Okay.
just so everybody knows clinically, I do a lot of anxiety treatment
Yeah.
and probably I'm a therapist, but I would say anxiety coach is a good way to describe me in a lot of
Yes.
ways where
That's
I'm
what you're
really
doing.
yeah, I love hearing about triggers. I really love thinking about anxiety as one of these superpowers, and like any
Mm.
superhero, that archetypal superhero story when they first get the magic wand or they first get the power, and like they zap the building and like they can't control the wand. I think about
Right.
anxiety a bit like that. It's a bit of a
Yes.
superpower, and when it's out of control, boy, nothing worse, right? Really horrible, as I'm sure everyone listening knows. But when we can control it, right, that your heart
Hmm.
rate is up. This happened to me a
Yeah.
lot actually in the last several years where I've had a bit of like an anxious trigger response. To the
Mm.
point it's kind of uncomfortable for me. I've been in a lot of therapy, and I wouldn't say I feel I'm beyond that. It's just, I don't know. It's not something I like that comes out, especially when I don't know what it's about. But I've been in this work long enough that when it happens, it's like almost everything else shuts down because I really want to pay attention to it. So
Yeah.
When it comes to anxiety for self-awareness, I think the first, and it's sort of obvious, but I'm just going to say it, really honoring and paying attention to when you shift from states of calm to states of anxious. Is it times of the day? Is it around certain subjects? For me, it's, my anxiety lives in some very clear places. And so when it gets kind of churned up, triggered, activated, whatever word you like, I like to pay attention to that. And I like to have some knowledge about what it is if I can to help me feel more oriented. That and then the tools, right? We don't know that, we need a deep breath until we use a little self-awareness and understand, sure, anxiety always takes away our breath. Right? It always takes away our sense of like mastery and control. So self-awareness around anxiety, those are a couple of sort of ideas. I think that moving into sort of next tentative thing about nutrition and anxiety, there's a scoping review by Laura Lachance and Monique Anchun. Monique, I'm sorry, I'm getting your name wrong. And I think Uma Naidu was an advisor on that paper as well. It's a scoping review of nutritional psychiatry interventions and studies on anxiety. I think it's open source. Yeah, I think the bottom line is there's really only been one study, the EASE GAD study, that was completed by the team I just mentioned. And they found that intensive counseling, it's always anxiety coaching around nutrition helps, that in clinical settings, it helps. Most of these studies are looking at promoting a kind of more Mediterranean style diet with, trying in some ways getting a little bit more nuanced and detailed than like the, no sugar, no carbs, no whatever, and say, okay, Mediterranean style diet means I have my little rhyme for what I recommend people kind of start with this seafood, greens, nuts and beans, and a little dark chocolate. So you think about all of those foods, they're reasonably kind of low carbohydrate, maybe not the beans. I add into their rainbow vegetables and fermented foods. And this is how I think as a nutritional psychiatrist, that we're thinking in food categories. So for people with anxiety specifically, not lots of data. There's a correlational study looking at choline. Choline we find in eggs and tofu, which makes it one of my favorite nutrients because, if you find people who like eggs and tofu, I think those people are probably great. We're going to get along because, if some people want to argue about eggs and tofu, it's like, next, swipe left, right? Is that what they say these days? Keep swiping. So, but I would say that for anxiety and nutrition, there are a couple of just quick ideas. One is, emotional eating, quote unquote, or anxious eating, I think is something to really pay attention to and try and up level. I'm the kind of person that like when I get physical anxiety, when I get my trauma triggered, whatever, like I like to nosh, I like to nibble, I like to have my bevy with me. It's just how I am. I get teased about it sometime. I don't care. You know why? It helps me feel great. So, but I like making sure though that I'm not snacking on the black and white cookies. My children will tell you that's all I do, but it's not true. Or just the ice cream, which can be a go-to, right? But that I'm being intentional for myself that it's not later at night because that's not really when I want to be eating. I'm intentional that it's going to be a little more nutrient density. I'm intentional that it's going to be mostly water for my bevy, but occasionally I get a little special spindrift or something or kombucha,
something with flavor,
something with a little flavor, maybe a little herbal tea. So, so again, nutrition for anxiety, I think, is about using comfort foods appropriately. There's a illustration in Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety of comfort food for carb craving. And it's about, looking at something like, I don't know, you want to have a sweet potato or even a regular potato with a little bit of salt and pepper and butter at night. Okay. Like,
go ahead.
You just ate a great source of potassium and beta carotene. And, that's different than going down for a burger and fries at the local fast food place. And so those are a few ideas around nutrition and anxiety.
This is a good place to stop for today, but don't go too far because we're diving even deeper in continuing our conversation with Dr. Drew Ramsey. Be sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it, and I'll see you in the next episode. I'll be back in a few more days with another podcast. Until then, be well and aloha.